Welcome to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast, where we cut through the noise and help you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff Somke.
Being an abolitionist requires unlearning every single thing we've been told about jails, prisons, and police since birth. To consider people as full human beings instead of monsters and psychos. To prioritize community over our selfish need for revenge. This is Awkward. 10 demands.
On this episode of the Did Nothing Wrong podcast, I sit down with the rapper, journalist, and political activist known as Awkword. We discuss the intersection of hip-hop and politics, as well as the crazy situation in the world around us, and how we can survive and even thrive in it. Stick around.
This is a crusade! This is a holy war against the deep state!
Where are the dictators? Where are the strong men?
Donald Trump is our instrument for retribution!
I'm going to fight for Christians. I'm going to fight for white people.
They have the Great Reset. We have the Great Awakening.
And why shouldn't I root for Russia? Which I am.
I want to see these people go through misery because of their grooming against our children.
After the assailant entered the home asking, "Where's Nancy? Where's Nancy?" Those are the very same words used by the mob when they stormed the United States Capitol.
I did nothing wrong.
Awkward, thank you for joining me on Did Nothing Wrong today. It's great to have you.
It's great to be here. I love your podcast, and I look forward to talking with you. I know you always do your research and your homework, so I know you got some good stuff coming.
I do my best, man. Thank you. I appreciate the compliment.
Of course.
So, how did you get started making music?
I grew up in a musical household, but not to the extent that many others did. My parents weren't musicians, but there was always music on, Motown and then the hippie stuff. So both being in one way or another politically influenced or making political statements. So interestingly, they kind of always went together, music and thought, music and protest. And I started out, you know, I was violent from a really young age. I've got a lot of mental health issues and neurodivergencies. And my mom was a pacifist and an activist, and it took her many years, but she figured out how to get me to channel all that anger. And instead of going around searching for Nazis to beat up, creating organizations and programs and music to get that out and to have a more positive, hopefully more influential impact. So it started out for me just as writing poetry, and looking back, that was some terrible stuff. You know, and then personally, you know, with influence from my cousins who co-formed the Skinheads Against Racial Prejudice.
Oh, Sharps. Okay.
I had the Sharps. I had a strong punk and hardcore oi background.
Okay.
But then my babysitter came over, playing Public Enemy and Run DMC, and kind of all of that came together, and I started looking for musicians, producers to create backdrops for me to turn that poetry into rap music. And, you know, I started out really bad. Having no idea what the difference was between poetry and a song. But then over the years, you know, I figured out what it was to be a musician and a songwriter and an executive producer. And ideally, I would like to believe that my actual raps, my writing, my flow has improved over the years as well. And that's just something you're not going to hear from most artists who, you know, will tell you they've been the best since day one. And didn't have to work at it, you know.
Right. And of course, if everybody was the best since day one, then nobody was, because nobody really ever had to work at it. It's interesting how people don't want to cop to that. Like, that there just is this tremendous amount of work.
Especially in hip hop.
Oh yeah.
Especially in hip hop.
It's like you're seen almost as weak if you aren't like a genius right out of the gate. And it's like, come on. We've all heard the demo tapes of these people. We've all heard the first album. It doesn't matter who you're talking about. everybody's got
Yep.
like a few embarrassing demos kicking around. So just, lean into it, own it,
Absolutely.
own it. Come on.
Yep.
And the people who do that work, the people who get in there and like practice real hard and figure out how to improve what they're doing, improve their craft, those are the ones that you hear someday and you're like, oh, that guy was a legend. He just kind of made it overnight. It's like, no, he didn't.
Yeah.
No, he worked at
Yeah.
it. She worked at it. They all did.
Absolutely. No one will know. I mean, unless suddenly I become mainstream, which I know for a fact isn't happening based off of the content itself.
It's going to be a real interesting mainstream if you do. I mean, that would be something really cool.
Right. It would actually be the mainstream we would so much prefer. But yeah, no one's going to say that about me, an overnight success. And that's for a variety of reasons. I mean, among them too, that I have never taken a penny of profit off my music. It is not the entirety of who I am. And more importantly, it is one of the avenues in which I give back, so to speak.
Right.
So yeah, I've been doing this for a long ass time. And as I've gotten older, I've matured. So the purpose behind the music and the content itself, I think is stronger, meaning like we founded 10 Demands, an abolitionist organization, in 2020. And then I made the 10 Demands song and video. That's a little different from this really famous song I have called Bars and Hooks with millions of YouTube views, but has no lasting value, in my opinion.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you have kind of gotten back to your roots in a way, the stuff that you've made more recently. It's funny you bring up going mainstream, because the stuff went mainstream for a hot second in the early 90s that has a bit of a political agenda to it, that has some politics to it. And, it was never really big, and it got overshadowed real fast by the stuff coming out of California, the G-Funk stuff. But there was a minute there where you could be a political hip hop artist and actually have a massive hit record. It was not long. It was not a very long period of time, but it happened.
The industry has just fucking gotten so much worse since then.
Right.
As has society alongside it.
We long for the days of the early 90s, It's just like, oh man.
In a lot of ways.
Things were so different back then. So there's always been this vein of hip hop that's been politically active and aware pretty much since the beginning of hip hop. There's been somebody talking about the greater issues in the culture and using it to address that. And sometimes it's overt, sometimes it's not. It's people just how they live, and you look at their lifestyle and you can be like, okay, so that guy's an activist, regardless of what the music necessarily sounds like. And it seems like your music is part of that tradition of activism, that vein of...
Thank you. That's a compliment, actually. I have struggled with that overtness versus implicit stuff. I don't want to listen as a fan. I don't want to feel like I'm being preached to.
Right.
And if the music isn't something I want to listen to, I don't... Unlike everyone else, not everyone, unlike most people, my wife, my kids, who probably won't listen to the lyrics and turn it off right away, I'll listen to it, but I'm not going to put it on over and over again.
Right.
So yeah, some songs of mine are pretty fucking overt, and some are not. But I definitely appreciate that, what you said, because, I think the majority of my catalog is hopefully not so preachy that it's like, bro, who are you to fucking tell me what to do also?
Oh yeah. And it's such a fine line. Like you think, and this is one that I've always kind of struggled with myself, that if you're ever going to talk politics to somebody, that you have to be perfect. That's the part that's really hard, is like, you can't have anything wrong with anything you believe at all, or else they're going to turn that around and say, well, how are you talking to me about this when you do this, this, and this?
Right. Absolutely. And I've got it from every angle, like I've had so many people hate on me from the left, people I thought were really good friends. And then I've got the Andy Knows coming after me too.
And of course, these are guys that they don't have any level of good faith at all. They're just digging for anything they can use to beat on you with, because that's what they do. That's just
right.
Yeah.
That is it. And there is a lot of that. And you have to grow a thick skin, no matter, like, whether you're an artist, a musician, doing the work that you do. I mean, and when I first was on social media, like, it affected me. Certain things that were said or whatever, email, death threats, like, that affected me. It changed my, like, I couldn't be, I didn't feel safe. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah.
Like, I worried, and sometimes it was even dumber than that. Like, you called me fat, like,
Right.
and then like over the years, you realize that none of that shit matters. Like,
Yeah.
I don't respond to any of that shit.
You just have to basically walk right through it. I mean, I can remember the first time somebody sent me screenshots of Google Maps of my address, and I was just like,
Yeah, that's
okay,
no fun.
shit's real now. Now I have to
Yeah.
deal with that
Yep.
possibility. But are you going to
Right.
stop because somebody did that?
I'm not stopping what I'm doing, but now I'm prepared for you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for letting me know that this is out here. Thank you for letting me know in a way that is
Yeah.
bad enough that I'm going to take it seriously, but mellow enough
Right.
that
And
I
as a
don't have
matter
to.
of fact, if they were smart, they wouldn't have sent us shit. They would have just
Exactly.
shown up.
Exactly. The fact that you sent it means that you're trying to scare me. That's
Right,
really what I
exactly.
take away from this. And that's where I find myself thinking, okay, well, thank you for telling me I need to fix that problem.
Right. You did me a favor.
So you mentioned that you have some punk rock and some hardcore and some oi in your background. And that was definitely one of the questions I was going to ask, because at one point it seemed like there was a lot of crossover between people who were interested in certain veins of hip hop and people who were into certain, like, louder and faster and harder styles of music. How did you end up getting into punk and hardcore?
I mean, it was really my cousin's influence mostly, but I really think that as a Jew growing up, and I'm a Palestinian Jew, but I didn't even like know that at the time.
Right.
I dealt with a lot of anti-Semitism, and also witnessed every other type of disgustingism all around me, and realized that it was way worse for other people than it was for me as, like, the Jew. And there was so much of that angst and anger and politics in punk music that's just the first thing that I, gravitated toward.
Right.
But then when I started writing and started listening more to hip hop and started identifying more, both theoretically and like philosophically, but like in everyday life, like my experiences with Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, Latino people has always been better than my experiences with white people. Men in particular, I have a major problem with. Like, you're not one of them, and I can tell right away. It does not take me long for me to know whether you're going to try to out macho me. I'm not into that. So over time, like, both my style of writing and, like, I guess what I started to listen to more and more, it's how it shifted from the punk more to the hip hop. But you're right. Like, one of my mentors, Ill Bill,
right.
he came from a heavy metal and rap background, and he rapped about that and spoken about that so many times, like, like writing lyrics in his hip hop notebook with a Pantera shirt on,
Yep.
the only thing I'll say about this, though, for what it's worth, is that, no matter how long I've been in hip hop, no matter where I grew up, where I've lived, what I've done, I'm a guest,
Right.
because of my skin color. So it is worth noting that I believe, other than maybe Mos Def and Saul Williams, pretty much every rapper who was also into metal and punk, Beastie Boys, Ill Bill, like I said, Gore-Tex, whatever, they're white, or
Right.
they're a Jew, or they're whatever. They're not the the stereotypical Black rapper. And so it's worth noting. I mean, I don't know what it means, but I would say there is some influence in hip hop culture from punk, but hip hop culture, on the reverse side, has influenced the whole world way more significantly than anything influenced hip hop.
They have hip hop everywhere now. They have hip hop in places that you would not expect to have it. You're right. It's everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, one of my friends blew up in Korea, and he went and toured in Korea.
Nice. And that's the kind of cool thing that can happen, because everybody's into hip hop. Everybody has their own kind of indigenous style.
And the access. Yep. And the access.
Yep. When I was a kid, I remember hearing French hip hop and thinking, wow, like DJ Solar and stuff like MC Solar and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
thinking this is the coolest shit I've ever heard. I have no idea what he's saying, but this language works. The way his delivery works. This is amazing.
His flow, yeah.
You know, Brazilian Portuguese is the same way. It's like I don't speak it real well, a little bit here and there from the jiu-jitsu, but like you listen to stuff in Brazilian Portuguese, it's hip hop. Some languages were just made to flow in.
Some of my favorite rappers right now that I just can't get enough of, pretty much like, I think like the three that I've been like playing nonstop are all Latino rappers, two of whom incorporate a lot of Spanish into the music.
Right. And it's just one of those things that like after a while you're like, okay, this is a style of music that now kind of belongs to the world at the same time. It belongs to the people who are, you know, kind of on the downside of things.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily belong up in,
the truth.
Up in the club, up in the stratosphere.
That's the truth. In the way that, you know, the whole world is experiencing it now and participating. You're right that like that ownership has kind of expanded. But your second point is also very critical. You know, it is still a music like punk or hardcore of the working class, of the poor, of the oppressed, and anyone who sits there and judges a rapper for talking about, first of all, what he went through growing up. So that's the violence, the guns, whatever, or talks about their life now with the cars and the TVs and the mansions. How dare you? Yeah. If you didn't grow up with nothing, watching these commercials and these TV shows of the rich white people, then you don't understand why that's what they're prioritizing. Like, if you grew up with all that shit, then your privilege excludes you from getting it. And I mean, getting it fully. I mean, I, myself included, I get it as best as I can.
It's interesting that you bring that up because like one of the things that came about 2016 was it finally occurred to people just how many rappers had referenced Donald Trump on a record.
Yeah.
Because of him being this perceived rich guy, this billionaire, this guy who's made it and does big deals and all this other stuff.
So true.
And you didn't think twice about it because like, you know, coming up when I came up, the guy was essentially like a reality TV star. He wasn't somebody you thought about all that much because he just wasn't that relevant to your life. But you could see where somebody would drop a verse where they would say something about it because, well, I mean, he represents a certain thing to certain people.
Exactly.
And then you realize
anyone,
like, oh man.
Right. I mean, anyone who missed what he did with the Exonerated Five, that huge fucking ad he put out to like lynch these black men who were innocent, you know, or who missed the era of him, like with the, you know, like not paying his illegal immigrant employees. You know, most people, like you said, are unaware of his litany of failed businesses. They see him as this epitome of like American success. So to your point, he kept getting name dropped. And like Nas and Jay-Z made a song called Black Republicans. Fuck you. Seriously. Okay. And then you see what happened with Kanye, and then you got the Jesse Lee Petersons of the world too. So, I mean, moving on.
Right. So you mentioned some of the stuff that you've been listening to lately. Who would you say your biggest musical influences are? Like, what makes you want to write? What makes you want to go and make music?
They're all different. What I'm listening to right now is these guys are like most people haven't heard of. One is called Nico Is. He started he first got a name by being in like a group with Talib Kweli.
Okay.
And then there's another guy that even fewer people have heard of called Doza the Drum Dealer, who I thought at first was just a producer. But he has my two favorite songs right now. And then Nems is a guy who is not like those other two. He's more like Doza the Drum Dealer in the sense that he is not rapping about the stuff that I'm rapping about. Nico is probably the closest to the stuff, to the like content that I produce. So what that tells you again is like the political shit has to actually sound good too, guys. Like,
Right.
unfortunately, right? And so I admit what I listen to isn't always what I sound like. Now, the other part, like, who influenced me, those, of course, are the people that you would expect, like the Chuck D's, right?
Right.
That, but nowadays, no rapper is ever the reason that I want to write. There's only three things that influence me to get back in the studio, or even start writing that kind of thing again. And it's either something that, is a big deal in my life, some kind of tragedy, or like, just a new realization, like coming to terms with how fucking crazy I am, which took 30 years.
Right.
Or something happening in society, right? Like the march in Charlottesville. That's a perfect example of a moment in time that inspired me to do something. And then the last, just to give credit to the producers, if someone sends me a beat that's fire, I might just be inspired and just blast something out in 20 minutes.
Right. When you catch that vibe of like, oh, this is great. I need to do something.
But that's rare
this.
Nowadays.
Yeah.
I am way more known as an organizer and a journalist, I think, now than I am as an artist. For 20 years, I was getting hundreds of beats a week and requests for interviews and this and that and requests for collabs. And now I'm getting contacted, but it's for completely different things. Although I had 2 conversations today prior to meeting with you where people are interested in my music. So things come and go and priorities change, and we are all somewhat dictated, and the memory of us will be dictated far less by how we perceive ourselves than by how others perceive us. So
that's a great thought right there, because really you don't get to write your own obituary.
No.
Nobody does, really. You go, and then the people that were around you that knew who you were, they're the ones that make up their minds about what you were and how to feel about you.
Yep.
You mentioned Chuck D and Public Enemy, and I want to go back to that because, like, if you've listened to the beginning intro of this podcast, you've heard my attempt to knock off some of what they were doing around about the time of Apocalypse 91. I have been a huge influence by those guys, by the Bomb Squad, by their production style. That was
I like the intro, by the way.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And it was, like I said, I've told a couple people that. It's like, yeah, it's a kind of blatant Public Enemy ripoff to some extent, but it's them. They came out at a time when things were kind of in transition, and they put out music that metal people could get into. They put out music that hardcore people could get into, but they were talking about this like militant black liberation that was, I mean, there is, no real analog to what these guys were doing. And to what we were saying earlier, where there was a minute where it sold records, it did. It sold records for a minute. And you're very fortunate, in my opinion, that you got to work with Chuck. Because again, that's a guy that they aren't making any more of those. He is who he is, and he came through and influenced pretty much everyone in the culture, and there just doesn't seem to be another one of those coming down the pike. What was that like?
Well, I have to clarify, I have a song with KRS-One who's in a similar vein.
Right.
Although KRS-One has done some dumb shit recently.
He got a little weird a few years ago.
Yeah, like appearing with Mayor Adams. Yeah. Anyway, so, but like a similar type of artist, I never made a song with Chuck D. He actually, like heard my music, booked me for an interview, like did this, speech where he was talking about like, supporting my music. And so we stayed in touch for, a number of years, and we still talk occasionally. So for me, it was just an incredible honor to get his cosign, which is something they talk about in hip hop a lot. And a lot of people say, fuck the cosigns, I did it on my own. Well, okay. And honestly, that is harder to do.
Sure.
I benefited by being able to say that I was co-signed by Chuck D. And again, especially based on the way that I look, that adds some credibility. But the truth is, it just was a humbling thing to hear him talking about me and saying that I make poignant music and whatever else he said. It was definitely an amazing thing. And it also points to another fact that many people probably don't know. In addition to making all the music he's made, he's got an international radio station.
Yes. Yes.
So he was playing my music, but there's also a show that plays only music from outside of the US. And he's actually a really great like visual artist too.
Yeah.
So it was in the context of him being like a radio producer and show host, in which I had that connection with him, which is, different than a story I might tell about being in a studio creating art with someone.
Right. Definitely. It's cool that you got to do that. It's cool that, he was able to see what you do and say, wow, this is something that should come out. Because, they're just, and it's interesting that you bring up the thing about the cosign, because I find myself thinking, like, I get that everybody wants to have, done it completely on their own, but I'm not sure anybody really does. I think that everybody's
it's a hip-hop
influenced
thing, man.
Yeah.
This obsession with like not getting the cosign is a hip hop thing so much, because you're right. It doesn't really happen. Whether it's like this public announcement like Chuck D made, or a much more valuable, I'm going to take you under my wing thing. No one in any type of music does it on their own, really.
Yeah.
Like the people that blow up overnight, like that's really rare still to this day. The people that are successful have connections. There are so many brilliant fucking artists. The best artists on earth have never been heard from. A lot of them are in prison.
Yeah. And a lot of them just couldn't get past those things that drive them, that in some ways make them great artists.
Sure.
They just can't. And it's like, it doesn't necessarily translate to success in life. There are a lot of these people who just can't really get their shit together for one reason or another. Not even necessarily their fault. There's a lot of undiagnosed mental illness out there. We do a shit-tastic job
I have
of
a
helping.
really fucking hard time, man.
And it's like, you got lucky to some extent that you've been able to get it as together as you have, and that you're sitting here having this conversation, because there's a lot of people that just aren't capable of that. They may be brilliant as artists, but man.
I will say that I went through a period of time where I thought, I'm an artist and I'm crazy. I don't really know how, but I know these two things and they go together, and I'm allowed to be this way. And like, if you have like a negative side effect as a result, sorry, I'm a crazy artist, and that's not cool. Right. And then there, kind of at a similar time, I was trying to fucking kill myself, basically, just doing tons of drugs and other risky behavior, so to speak, as a result of being crazy, and then losing my mom, who was my person, the only one who like kept me sane. So now you see me and you say, like, I'm lucky I'm here. My face hasn't been destroyed. My knuckles have, but like I'm sitting here, I'm alive. In a home, in a house, like an actual house, not a tent.
Right.
And so I'll say that I owe a ton of that to my wife, who is not into hip hop, who is not an activist, who is a Hispanic woman who had two beautiful daughters, and saw something in me when I saw nothing in myself anymore, and has an amazing job and has never lost her job and just keeps getting promoted. And if it weren't for her, I wouldn't be sitting here.
Right. So shouts out. Good job. Thank you. Thank you for taking care of this guy.
Yeah, I need it, man.
So we were talking a little bit, you talked about things that made you want to get in and write, things that made you want to address, and you brought up Charlottesville. And I want to talk about that because it was a watershed moment, I think, for the entire culture, like as the world. Everybody kind of looked at that and said, okay, the world is not what we thought it was the day before. There are things that we thought were done that are not done. And you wrote a song about a woman who was killed by one of the torch marchers, one of the neo-Nazis. James Fields decided to run this woman over in his car. Her name was Heather Heyer, and she was essentially murdered by this guy who's now doing life in prison, if I remember right, for his role in that. And it turned into this big moment where we all had to kind of decide, like, what side are we really on? Because there were people who were kind of walking that line a little bit of like, yeah, I'm edgy, I'm an edgelord, I have this, sometimes I say stuff that's kind of a little bit questionable. And then all of a sudden, like, the road that leads to got illuminated really brightly for everybody. And everybody kind of had to take sides. And then there was the centrists too, right? Mm-hmm.
All the people who, like, what you're talking about is that crazy left to right loop, which I saw happen a lot.
Oh, yeah.
But then there's also just the people who always want to be neutral and
right.
It's safer for me and that's my privilege. I'm just going to be here and like let all that shit happen around me. It doesn't affect me.
And this is just one of those things you can't be neutral about. You can look at this and say, it's regardless of how neutral you think you are, this is coming for you. This is coming for you.
Exactly.
And it's going to. So there's one side that you should probably be on here if you've thought this through at all. And you should probably figure out how to get right, because otherwise you're going to end up getting got by the right, I guess is the best way I can think of to put it.
And as you were saying that, I started to like extrapolate like what might be coming next. Like if we don't pick the correct side, what happens? Does that mean that does that mean that, let's say we both know, but we know what the correct side is. So let's say I choose the wrong one and I'm on the right. Does that mean that I'm fucked personally because the left is going to fuck me up? Or does it mean that I've chosen the wrong side and the right, I've chosen the correct side, the left, and that means the right's going to kick my ass. And I know what my answer is, and it's not the good one.
And there's a lot of people that don't want to make that choice. I mean, you can look at it in terms of just, people since the election. And this is something I'm going to rant about a little bit here because it's driving me crazy, and it has been. The Democrats were more than willing to bring up the specter of fascism when it comes to Trump and the people coming in. They were more than willing to get your campaign donations and push the idea that Trump is a fascist. But the minute they lost, everybody's shaking hands and they're friends. Everybody's collegial. And this is the part where I find myself just like, you're either anti-fascist or you're not. You either believe that this is a bad thing and it's not going to change because someone else won an election. It's not going to all of a sudden be like, well, guess what? I think he's going to be presidential now. No, he's not. We know what he's going to do. We've seen it. It's going to be worse now, if anything. So it's really been frustrating to watch, not just like the political parties, but the large corporations. Like all of a sudden you see Facebook changing all of their policies and procedures, and you're seeing it shift quickly. This is not a short thing that's happening. And as a result, it's very disconcerting to watch. You're like, okay, it didn't take the Nazis but almost 3 months when they took power in Germany. What's this going to look like? How bad is this going to get right now?
Exactly. And that's the point I was getting at, is that like, I think NRA, etc., the right is heavily armed and way more organized. We on the left spend all of our time calling each other grifters, and like, I bet you like 1% of us is fucking armed. No one, you sounds like you took jujitsu, but most of us are like, like, we don't do what they do. We don't want to reduce ourselves to their level. Well, violence has to be met with violence, period.
No.
Like read Ward Churchill, pacifism is a pathology.
At some point, you have to understand that pacifism only works on an opponent with a conscience.
Right.
Like, I get that. I get why this is attractive, but I think that it's really difficult to use examples of people who were pacifist in environments where the enemy could be shamed, where the enemy could be, made to look morally bad as a result.
Right. And have it work.
Right. I don't think pacifism works, say, against Vladimir Putin. I don't think pacifism works against somebody like, Maduro, who's prepared to whack his political opponents. I don't think
Or
somebody...
Netanyahu or Trump.
Netanyahu's another one. Trump.
Yeah.
None of these guys,
Yeah.
it's nice. You're a pacifist. Now face the wall. I think at
Right.
some point,
That's exactly right.
time for pacifism is when you have an opponent who is willing to listen or can be worked with on this level.
Which, for the most part, doesn't exist, and less so every decade and generation. The one thing I'll say in regard to that is that the reason MLK was able to be successful and to influence like civil rights acts and voting rights acts is because the government was so terrified of Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party, the Weather Underground, that they said, we better listen to the pacifist, the Christian, because these Muslims and Jews want to bomb us and create alternative societies where they don't need our hospitals and schools. Like, oh my God. And so, likewise, the liberals who complain, who say like Antifa burned down Portland. Well, or burned down Seattle. Seattle almost decriminalized a lot of things and almost defunded because they were so scared of the activists that they started listening to the people like 10 Demands who were coming in more calmly and saying, here are the demands that these people burning your city are demanding. It's not for no reason. Here's why, and here's how to fix it. Your way is garbage.
Yeah. And it's like, I live in Seattle. I know exactly how this went. And I find myself thinking the reason people have been upset and angry is because the police have been under a consent decree for decades here. The police have gotten themselves into a mess in terms of their perception, in terms of the stuff they actually do, that people were angry enough when the opportunity came up that they were prepared to take that anger and channel it into things like burning down a precinct. Do I think that's a great way to handle it? Hell no, I don't. I want to live in a society where people don't feel...
Yeah, me too. Man, I don't know if I said it yet, but I am anti-violence.
Yeah.
100%.
I've been very consistent about that over the time I've done this. We've got, almost 170 episodes. Go back and find me where I talk about violence. I want to live in a society where people are treated well enough that nobody feels like they have to go burn down a police station.
Right. But that's an important distinction.
Maybe we'll finally get to a point where there aren't police stations.
Right. But that's an important distinction because we're not there now.
No, we're not.
We're not there now. And cops don't stop crime. They don't prevent crime, and they don't even solve crime. They solve 2% of all major crimes.
Yeah.
While committing a third of all stranger murders nationwide. And it, to me, that's long for decades now. Cops in cages have been a major issue for me because it's so very clear the profit motive, the prison industrial complex and its ties to the military industrial complex. Literally, as Steve Donziger said, like the humans are the product, basically, or the capital. Like we need to find as many of these things to put into this institution to continue this thing that we're building. And when you look back, if you read Our Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis, it's just an important book because it was like one of the first on this subject. She goes into detail about the time period in which prison construction was at its absolute highest rate. It coincided perfectly with both the sharpest declines in violent crime and the sharpest increase in propaganda. News stories about the black man in the alley, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
It was designed, and I hate to say it for any of you true blues out there, but guess who wrote the crime bill that created mass incarceration? Joe Biden. And guess what? He's better than the other option, which is fucking unbelievable.
And that's the whole thing. It's like, look, nobody said this was the best option out there. He was just the best option we were likely to get.
Cop. Right. I mean, I didn't want to vote for Kamala Harris. Are you fucking kidding me? What she did in California is like, if I weren't an abolitionist, I'd go toward words like evil. I don't believe in that type of thing. But the results of her work were devastating.
And she is at this point, a politician. She is at this point
100%.
putting what is it going to take to get me to that next plateau? What is it going to take to get me into that next office? That's what I believe in.
Which is why I don't care about federal politics. I can't. I have to focus on local shit because that's where people actually care. As soon as they get out of that tiny little community where they know that their constituents,
yep,
becomes business.
It is. And it's depressing. And the thing is, you can get a lot of agreement on both sides of just about any issue that this is bought and paid for. If you ever want to find some common ground with somebody who's a real right winger, start talking about
Very
that.
True.
You ever want to have a conversation that's not going to turn into you suck because you're a liberal, you suck because you're a leftist. Start talking about the bought and paid for politicians. You start there and you can have a good one.
Exactly. So tell me why that on a larger level hasn't moved from that to this means 1% versus 99%. If we can agree that the corporations and the government are colluding and that all of us are suffering, that connection should be happening, man. That's unfortunate.
Well, I think Occupy scared the hell out of them. I think honestly, you look back and Occupy, there's a book in there somewhere. Somebody needs to write it. Somebody needs to do a retrospect on how did we?
Not a book.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted you.
No, totally fine. I was thinking that somebody needs to do a real, how did we get from there to here? The names that were part of the Occupy project, the people who became somewhat famous or made their name out of Occupy, people like Tim Pool, for instance. He was this Occupy guy, and now he's this right-wing jerk-off. How did that happen?
That's for sure.
How did we get to the point? Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Tim.
Great story that needs to be told. With you 100%.
Right.
I should have let you finish.
No, that's okay. Go.
I did interview a couple of the original organizers on the 10-year anniversary. So we talked a little bit about what led up to Occupy, that moment in time, and what has happened since. But covering that fucking, I don't even know how it can happen, that movement from far left, which you clearly couldn't have ever been, to far right and blowing up. That part we didn't touch on. So that is a whole other story.
I don't think people caught on to that quite yet. I think people they assumed for a number of years that, guys like Tim Pool and guys like Glenn Greenwald's another one, they were still what they said they were at one point. And nobody quite realized, you're not really a liberal anymore if you ever were. I'll buy that you were at one point, but at some point you shifted. Your politics are different.
Liberal is not even the right word. To me, liberal is an insult. Tim Pool acted, he put on a show as a leftist, not just a liberal. If you were at Occupy, you were radical, or you were pretending. And then, but Glenn Greenwald, that's even worse. Who's that other guy from Rolling Stone?
Oh, Taibbi, Matt Taibbi. Yeah.
This is personal for me. My mom loved that guy. My mom is rolling over in her fucking grave. He and Glenn Greenwald were legitimate journalists.
Yeah.
So not this Tim Pool bullshit who just came out of nowhere and should not have blown up in the first place. These guys were doing hardcore investigative work for years, making important points that we would agree with, and then bam.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's this is not something those guys in this era, in their previous era, would have been okay with. They can say what they want, but there's no way
it's
that
mind blown.
2011 Glenn Greenwald is good with what Glenn Greenwald's doing now. There's no way.
No. And I can't fathom that. I really can't.
Yeah.
I can fathom going the other direction, because the reason the right is wrong is because it's about hate. It's about these people are better than these people, whatever. And obviously it's a lot more than that. It's a very weak definition, but you get my point. The left is the opposite of that. Whether you understand it correctly or not, and whether you get the difference between equity and equality is not the biggest deal here. The point is is I can see being taught a whole bunch of horrible shit and then realizing your mistakes and moving left. How do you like grow up caring and then suddenly say, fuck it, fuck everybody who isn't me and rich and white?
I think a lot of it is the money. I think a lot of it is these people
there is more
realize,
money,
you're right. There's people on the right that are prepared to write massive checks. There's people like Harlan Crow. There's people like the Koch brothers that are, rich as hell, and it's totally worth it for them to buy up journalists.
That's a good point.
I mean, they'd buy Supreme Court justices. They buy journalists. They buy anybody
You're
that
100% right. That is it.
Can help them achieve their agenda. And, I mean, you look at you're a journalist. You know that journalism, for the most part, is not a profession you go into if you want to get rich. It just isn't.
Correct.
Never has been. Every so often, people hit the brass ring, they write a couple books, they blow up, and they become that journalist. But for the most part, there's a lot of people who are pretty famous that you've heard of that aren't necessarily rich or really even kind of doing much more than getting by. And I think if you're Matt
100%.
Taibbi, you're even Glenn Greenwald to some extent, you're looking at like, man, I got to retire at some point. I don't have any money. I've been putting all of this out, and the offer starts to seem pretty good when they come to you and say that.
The idea that they weren't making money is upsetting, like making enough, but then again, we don't know what enough is to them. No matter what the money, no matter what the offer is, I would never do it. Yeah. And neither would you.
I got to sleep. I got to sleep at night, I got to, at some point, got to look at myself in the mirror, and I don't think I would be able to do that if I was Matt Taibbi. I don't know how he does that.
Me neither, man.
But
I don't either.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about Charlottesville and how that kind of forced everybody onto a side.
Yes.
And one of the interesting kind of byproducts of that is that some of the people who were on that side walked away from it as a result of how that went. We've had a few people on the show who have talked about their experience with Charlottesville, then that turned them into like, oh my God, this is not what we thought about. The guy I'm specifically thinking about is a guy named Evan McLaren, who was sort of Richard Spencer's right-hand man with the National Policy Institute. He actually helped plan out Charlottesville. But the minute they realized, the minute it all went down, he realized this was a terrible idea, that they had just fucked up really, really, really badly. He disavowed the entire thing, turned over a lot of his emails, a lot of his, correspondence and hard drives with a lot of these guys to various journalists. And I'm going to be a little circumspect about what I say here. But he has, like I said, done his best, I think, to try and make up for some of the damage that he caused, some of the harm that he caused by helping put that shit show together. And I think that's really important, because you got to let people know that are involved in this and are looking for a way out. They got to know that there is one, I think. And I'm curious to get your take on the idea of like what that path of redemption looks like for someone who has been involved in white nationalism.
Yeah, totally. And I would just say, watch the movie Skin if you haven't. Daryl Lamont Jenkins is his work, and he's featured in that. It's about a guy who is, confronted numerous times by Daryl and and it's a true story. And the guy decides he's gonna listen. He gives all of his shit to the FBI, all his Nazi data to the FBI, and he spends like hundreds of hours of having an entire body's worth of Nazi tattoos removed. Anyway, it's worth a watch. But
I think I've heard of this. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I love Daryl, so like I love that his story's kind of told through that. But anyway, for me, a few things. I'm older, so by the time that Charlottesville happened, I had two daughters that I had adopted, essentially. And I was no longer on the streets. I had moved upstate to be with my wife, who was not going to meet me in the city. And I had spent 20 years on the ground. Like Secret Service files on me, getting my mask taken off with guns at my head, leading direct actions at the George W. Bush inauguration, numerous times for Mumia in Philadelphia and DC. We trespassed on the School of Americas in Georgia. So for me, it wasn't like this is new territory, in the sense that this fire in me came from this event and it didn't exist before. What was new was the fear and anger that suddenly all this shit that we had been working for so hard to at least like keep from the mainstream was suddenly like there. And not only that, but they're literally running people over with pickup trucks regularly. And the fact that this one individual, first of all, I don't believe in prison, but the fact that this one individual was convicted, that's a rarity. Usually they get away with it. And the same goes for the cops. So when, the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers do their little bullshit, they get protection from the police. When Black Lives Matter protests or like Black children protests, they get beat up. So for me, being an outsider in a sense, not being at Charlottesville, not being able to protect Heather and anyone else who might have been harmed, I felt bad. I felt like, and like that's what I talk about in the song. It could have been me that got hit by that car. I talk about crying like out on my porch, it made me think a lot about myself and my priorities. And am I not the same person because my wife doesn't want me risking my own safety anymore? Am I still providing value from afar as an online influencer or creating 10 demands and things like that? So I was upset. And so I was questioning myself. I was terrified about what I was seeing, and I was fucking angry about what happened to her. So I had actually made an announcement not that long before, maybe a year or two before, that I was quitting. I was done rapping. I was just going to do organizing and journalism. And that moment literally brought me out of retirement.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, seeing like that thing that, even if you're familiar with it, even if you're aware that this kind of stuff's out there. I mean, I grew up in Eastern Washington in the days of the Aryan Nations. They used to recruit at my high school. I have known plenty of people who got involved with that bullshit over the years. And
I never answered your question.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Oh my God.
Let's talk about that then. Let's talk about the path of redemption.
You wanted to know that, I think, more than anything. So apologies to the listeners. My friend here and I talked a little before we went on, and I think I answered a question he didn't ask. Anyway, so the answer to the question is that as an abolitionist, actually, as much, if not more, as an anti-fascist, I believe that anyone really is capable of redemption. Now, does someone in a position is someone like Donald Trump worth the time and effort? Obviously not. Like, the likelihood of him changing is a lot less strong than, a young kid who has, like you're talking about, who was recruited at your high school. So because of that, though, my general belief that, the reason people are like this is because of that recruitment. It's the conditions of their lives coupled with disinformation, whether it's generations of it through your parents or whether it's through school or this recruitment direct. It's not necessarily their fault. They found brotherhood. They found protection. They found a reason to be alive. And that's why these very susceptible people are also continue to be susceptible. They can still be influenced in the same way they continue to be influenced in the wrong way. So I believe redemption is possible. I believe it's incredibly important work. I believe that Daryl Lamont Jenkins, who does it and is very well known for it, is a hero and an incredibly brave human being. Because the last point I'll make on it is that I believe the responsibility does not fall on a black man. It falls on someone like me.
Yeah.
And even more so, it falls on people like who you talked about, the former Nazis.
Right.
If they have gotten out, they are the absolute, indisputable best resource for people who can get out in the future.
Right. And that's why I think it's so important to
can we trust
address
them?
that. Yeah.
Can we trust them?
Well,
That's
I think it
your
really
last
depends
question,
on,
right?
can you trust them? And I really think it depends on, like, what have they done to show you that they're trustworthy, you know?
Right. Do you trust that guy you were talking about?
Yeah, I think I do, because I know
Okay.
what he's tried to do to make up for it. I know that Evan has, provided information to anti-fascists, to journalists that they couldn't have gotten any other way.
Right.
We had Katie McHugh on the program, who was at one point a senior editor at Breitbart, was a direct report to Stephen Miller, was a direct report to Steve Bannon, knew Tucker Carlson really well. And she turned over a whole lot of correspondence. And again, it's like when you start seeing, hey, Stephen Miller reads VDARE articles, that came out of her email.
Right.
Stephen Miller this is not stuff anybody finds on their own. This is stuff that somebody has to give you.
Given. Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, like, huge props for doing that.
Yeah.
Whether it's like, you're a reality winner, and whistleblowing against the government or whistleblowing against a far right organization, it is dangerous and it is incredibly valuable. And then, so as far as trusting one individual to the next, that's a human to human thing. That's, you get vibes from people and you decide, right? And then you use evidence, like you explained. This person has done this.
Right.
I'm going to buy it. On the larger scale, though, like when we talk about actual organizing, when we see, these people who are trying to invite right-wing libertarians who are anti-war because of money or something, right? To an anti-war rally. Now we have a problem because we are communicating using secure messaging services. We are meeting in the same place where you might just turn around and kill me, right? If I don't know you personally, if you've been this person before, I want to believe you. I do believe you. It is my choice to believe you, but I cannot ignore security issues, right? InfoSec and all that stuff. That is not my specialty, but it's so important because it can destroy. I mean, 10 Demands alone, like, we're not an anti-fascist organization. Like, we're just abolitionists who want people just to stop suffering, right?
Yeah.
And like the amount of fucking leftists who came after us because I look the way I do, and so not every single person in the group was black. Like, it's tough, man.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And as far as InfoSec goes, you're only as secure as the weakest link. The easiest thing is not to crack the encryption. The easiest thing is to turn one of the people who's in the encrypted chat. That's how that's going to go.
Beautifully said. Yeah.
Honestly, if you don't trust the people that you're doing that kind of work with, you probably should not be in that room. You probably should not be in that circumstance.
Agreed.
And that's the conversation you have to have with the people that you're working with. Like, look, I understand this guy says all the right things. I understand that they have done this and that, but I'm not comfortable with it right now. Give it a while. Let me see some more changed behavior out of them. But for right now, no, I can't really do this. And I think if you're working with people you really trust, and you're working with people that you've, worked with for a while, and you all have each other's backs and whatnot, I think they should listen, because you're the person that they've gone through the war with. This other person might have a name, they might be famous and whatnot, but that's the kind of thing that's going to be a problem.
I'll share a story that I have not spoken publicly about before. I'm not going to use names, but 10 Demands as an organization is not where I wanted it to be when we created it. We had much grander intentions. We were actually planning on doing 10 Demands for economic justice, 10 Demands for climate justice. Like, it wasn't even just going to stop at, prisons and mass incarceration and criminalization. But there were issues in the group. One of the members, if not more than one, I started seeing drifting further and further right and talking less and less about the issues that mattered to me, which is fine. More importantly, saying things and doing things and working with people that concerned me. And as a result, 10 Demands is a collection of demands. And at this point, now that Google fucked us, we're not even a website. I'm still working on getting the website back up. There are still members who are as down as I am. But even yeah, I don't want to give it away, but like even a person of color who is directly impacted, who helps you found an organization, may turn out to be a Nazi.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
or adjacent. I wouldn't go as far as to call anyone in that group a Nazi. That's way too strong, but way too adjacent for my liking, and we don't talk anymore.
Fair enough. So what keeps you going? What gives you hope for the immediate future? Because we did talk about this before, about how we're both kind of convinced things are about to get very dark, very fast in this country. How dark that gets, well, I don't think anyone can really say at this point, but there isn't a whole lot that would surprise me, like real dark to real fucking dark, just so but we're not giving up. We're all still here. We're all still, getting up and doing the work every day. What keeps you going? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a tough question, and I'll say that I didn't for 1 second respond like whether publicly or internally, I'm giving up. Like that thought did not cross my mind. Well, giving up on my own life, that's happened. Giving up on my mission and our mission, that, as long as I'm alive, I'm not giving up on that. But I've witnessed so many liberals, centrists, whatever you want to call them, saying that like I'm devastated, I'm destroyed, I can't do anything. Like that is not the answer. I mean, so I have two things going on, right? I have this intense desire as a Jew who has family who died in the Holocaust and has two brown daughters. I want to get the fuck out of here. I am terrified, absolutely terrified. And I don't know if there's a single Jew who isn't, whether people want to say that's, fucking Zionist or not. Like, I'm not a Zionist. I'm a Palestinian Jew and I am pro-Palestine.
Right.
This is not that. It is built into my blood that like, I'm just waiting for the next Holocaust. On the other hand, how can I abandon you? How can I abandon my people in prison? How can I abandon Kat Brooks, who I work with? Like whatever, I can't do that. So there's nothing, I don't see any positive things happening anywhere around me that keep me going. It's just, I can't not. I don't know if there's a better answer than that. I think there's no option. I literally I would have to not be alive.
Yeah. At some point you're committed, you're down for it, and you're just going to keep going until you can't anymore.
And I guess the question is, in what way are you involved? So that's where, as I spoke about, I shifted. Like my way of being involved and working toward the mission is not as dangerous for me and my family as it would have been if I hadn't changed my methods.
Right. I really do think that one of the things that we all should be encouraging as much as possible is to take a look at what kind of community has been built on the other side and start looking at ways that we can all start connecting with each other in the real world. Because you look at things like megachurches and you realize that they're like essentially an electoral arm of the Republican Party along about election time. They have this huge organizing vector here. And I don't think the left has anything that compares to that in the same way. So one of the things that I'd kind of like to see people do is figure out a way to get out into the real world more and start connecting with people that have the same sort of thought process, the same sort of, political beliefs, the same sort of ideas. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to agree on everything, but just get out and figure out who your neighbors are, who the other people in your community are that agree with you on these things, and start looking at having a real world support network. Touch grass, as it
Absolutely.
were. That's, I mean, really, literally walk across the grass and, you know, say hi to them, something. Because I think it's really important to, like, just get out and figure out what people are really like off the internet. You know, get out of this.
Making that point today, it's never been more important.
Yeah.
Every day we're out there one bit less, right? And to me, there's nothing more important than these selfless mutual aid groups that do direct work with people every single day.
Yeah.
That's what keeps people alive while the larger scale initiatives are being done. If it weren't for these on the ground groups, there'd be no one to be working for. There'd be no one to be fighting for. I mean, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. There has to be. And you have to get out there and keep finding that inspiration in what we have rather than say I'm devastated. Because I remember being devastated. Right. I remember that. I remember the day after Election Day 2004 and just being fucking despondent. Like, this is it, man. I don't know how we're going to go forward with this. We get 4 more years of Bush. Jesus. You know, this is the worst. I'll say Trump is the worst president we've ever had, but I'll say W is the second, and it's a lot closer than a lot of people think. You know, we don't get to where we're at without W. And I remember looking at that and saying, this is fucked. What are we going to do? How are we going to get through this? And somehow, you know, it's 21 years down the road and we survived. Has it always been perfect? No, but I think that we've made a lot of progress. Do they want to knock that back? Yes. So we have to find ways to stop that, but not giving up was very important at that point. With the benefit of hindsight, you can look back and say, yeah, it's okay to take a day or 3 to be really upset about this because this is some depressing shit. And if you're really personally threatened by this somehow, if you have like personal circumstances, you know, that are going to make you one of the first people, I'm not going to judge you for wanting to go. Yeah. If that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. But I think if we stay in it, we're more likely to win. But I think we have to stay in it.
Agreed. And likewise, I speak for myself, but I know you would probably agree. Like, we shouldn't judge each other either on the ways in which we try to contribute. Everyone has different capabilities, different specialties, so again, like, whether I question it internally and you know, have that struggle or not, like, I don't believe that I should be judged for not going to violent protests anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I should judge the version of me that's out there right now who's still 20 and doing exactly what I was doing because now I'm older and wiser. No, I actually believe, like I mentioned before, that fear of violence is critical to the progress that has been made and that needs to be made. So even if you're just reading, like the right stuff, you're helping. Like, don't get down on yourself. Like, if you're disabled and can't go to a protest, do not get down on yourself for that.
Right.
You know, I don't blame you if you struggle with being disabled. My disabilities are difficult too, whether they're visible or invisible. But do what you can.
Yeah.
You know, every little bit helps. And we need as many people as we can get, because to your point about the mega churches, the right has the money, the infrastructure. We don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And we need to figure out how to fix that at some point.
For sure.
Because otherwise it's going to keep getting asymmetrical. The asymmetry is going to get worse. And eventually, maybe you can't come back from that. Maybe you can't.
Yeah.
But I think we can. So we'll see.
Yeah, and you're one of those people that is contributing to just that.
Well, thank you. I
You know,
try.
you taking the time to have certain people on and to educate your listeners, that is a major contribution.
I'm just making the show I'd want to listen to, and I'm putting the people on whose opinions and ideas are like, this person should get heard. You know, whatever they're about, this person should get heard. Yep. So thank you for coming on. How can people support you in the work that you're doing at this point?
It's a good question. I try to make this not about me. What I would like you to do is look up the co-founder and executive director of the Anti-Police Terror Project. Her name is Kat Brooks. I recommend following her and her work, as well as donating to the Anti-Police Terror Project. That would be the best way to help me, is to help her and them.
Okay. That's definitely something
But I
that
mean,
should be
I
pretty
guess if
doable.
yeah, I mean, but you can just Google Awkward. It's AWKWORD if you want to learn more about me. I'm not here to fundraise for myself, though. That's for sure.
Right. All right. Well, hey, thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate that you sat down with me. I'm glad we finally got this together because, man, it was great talking to you. You're an amazing guy, and we got to do this again at some point, man.
That means
really
a lot,
like
brother.
talking to you.
Yeah, it'd be my pleasure.
Word.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You have a great rest of your day, okay?
You too. Peace, brother.
Peace. Thanks for listening to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast. If you want to hear more, you can find us on the web at didnothingwrongpod.com. Please make sure you subscribe to get our content straight into your inbox. You can also follow us on Twitter at GRZABJJ, GRZABJJ, as well as DNWPod. We're extremely grateful for paid subscriptions and donations that allow us to keep doing this important work. Thanks, and remember, everyone mentioned did nothing wrong.